Guys, how are you?
Very well. Good evening.
Good evening.
Bit warm, isn't it?
It's hot. It's not as hot as yesterday, it has to be said. In that Targa, whoa.
Tell us about the Targa.
It was
Test drive.
Roof down all day jobby. When I say all day, I had the car for 3 hours, but we had a day to drive the car, film a verdict of it, edit it, and get it live on YouTube. It's on my YouTube channel.
Mission accomplished?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, the video was okay considering the short time we had to do it.
Good work.
You better tell us the exact car as well. So this is the 992 latest Targa, isn't it?
Yes, 992 Targa 4S. It was actually a pre-prod left hooker from Germany, which I believe has now gone back, hence why we didn't have a lot of time.
Okay.
But yes, I'd appreciate a watch. If you guys anyway wouldn't mind having a watch
I've
for
watched
us.
it. Looks good.
Excellent. Thank you. Appreciate
I started watching it and ran out of time, but I'll go back to it.
What is it, washing your hair?
I'll find a bit of time. I don't need it.
Well, look, so that was one of two cars in the last week that we've collectively been involved with.
Got to drive the Taycan.
Taycan.
Oh, here we go.
Jury's still out on that, isn't it? But we have done a little something on that, and that will be in next week's episode, including onboard video.
Yep.
But
we actually recorded most of the episode inside it, which was a bit.
We
novel.
did, and you ended up tuning a microphone at one point.
Oh, really? Did you have to shut that in? People don't need to see that.
Well, look, that's next episode, but this episode we've got a guest.
Yes.
It is Mr. Magnus Walker.
Absolutely.
And you guys said in Series 1 in your 10 icons, your 10 Porsche questions, the Porsche icon for both of you was Magnus Walker.
You're not going to bring this up, are you?
I'm absolutely about to embarrass you with that. Yes, absolutely.
Can I change my answer?
It'll be an eclectic chat for sure. It always is. So we'll bring on Mr. Walker now, shall we?
Let's do it.
Cool.
Yeah, like three geezers down the boozer. I get it.
Three geezers down. Yeah, exactly. So, although the first thing I did want to ask you, actually, it's a little bit off-piste, is we also do at the end of each podcast episode, we ask our guest or panelist these same 10 questions, and it kind of paints a picture as to what their kind of Porsche persuasion is. And one of the questions is, who is your 911 icon? It's not a car, it's geared towards a person. And these two said you. I think somebody else.
For face right there.
Well, yeah,
I'll take it.
So these two said you. I think another one of our guests has said you. You obviously were top 3 on the T911 21st Century Icons.
Whoa, podium, on the podium. How about that?
Yeah, exactly. Behind Mr. AP, no less. So, I mean, it's just not bad company to keep him. But yeah, I wanted to know, what your reaction is to that, really, and how that makes you feel.
Well, on one hand, flattered. On the other hand, I'll joke about it and say you geezers got way too much time on your hands to come up with these type of things. But, I think if I break it down, I talk about this a little bit because it does come up. Obviously, not the road to Redline top 3 podium, but people do ask this question quite often. And to me, I always say I'm just relatable. I'm an enthusiast like everyone else. We all enjoy Porsche, right? It's kind of my religion, my drug of choice. People like what I do. That's great. I'm not actually here to sell anyone anything. Sort of what separates me from other people is, I'm an enthusiast like you guys. It's not a company like where I'm building customer cars and, tuning stuff. So for me, I think my relatability really is I'm not really any different to anyone else. I like chasing the cars. I like driving the cars. I like talking about them. So I think that's kind of how I sum it up. If people relate to me on that level is, hey, we all have the poster on the wall, right? We all have that dream. We all love the car for everything it brings, the drive, the camaraderie, the people, the tours, the events, the way it looks. So I just appreciate the support that people give me for what I do. And I don't overthink it. I'll leave it at that.
And on that kind of note as well, your Outlaw meets have kind of diversified, haven't they? It used to kind of be really Porsche centric, but now, and I think that's a good thing, is you champion anybody's welcome. Is that kind of a conscious thing to kind of diversify and involve an enthusiast community that's outside of Porsche?
Yeah, for sure. I always say all true car enthusiasts share the same connection. You just pick your jug of choice, whatever car it is. you're into. It's like I'm all excited. I bought that 1975 AMC Hornet 48 hours ago, and I've already made a video on it, and I wasn't even looking for it. So for me, my background is, I've got a Super B tattoo there. I actually don't have a Porsche tattoo. My background is, I've owned a lot of different cars, whether it's American muscle cars, European sports cars, or Porsches. So for me, these outlaw gatherings kind of started on a whim, probably started at the Ace Cafe back in the day, and just sort of grew from there. But it was always a little bit for me, the Porsche purist is always super Porsche centric, and I'm a car guy. I'm a Porsche guy, but I'm also a car guy. So the gatherings always were all a welcome. There seems to be a lot of sort of elitist Porsche gatherings where it has to be a certain type of Porsche. And for me, people that relate to my story, kind of like what we're talking about, are just true car guys and enthusiasts. Yeah. So for me, it was never to sort of eliminate that sort of end of the car culture world. And then with my appearance in things like the Need for Speed game back in 2015, it was a big car culture. So it doesn't matter whether you're a Ken Block guy, a sport import tuner, a drift guy, a sports car guy, a hot rod guy, all are welcome. And for me, it's all about diversity of the culture. So that was why these outlaw gatherings kind of came out of, I'd travel, someone would shoot me a message. Hey, I'd love to meet you for a beer or whatever. To me, it was like, instead of trying to do a one-on-one thing, just do a gathering. To me, it's a way of meeting that culture in that city. And I've done them all over from LA to Sydney, generally in some sort of industrial area under a bridge. But the common bond that really brings them all together is they're never over-promoted. It's usually 48 hours before on the gram. It's not this big deal where you got to submit a car and sign in and register and overblown, and some panel decides if you're cool enough to come or not. It's run one type of thing.
Yeah.
So to me, I think that relates back to the great equalizer. All are welcome. I think a true car guy likes every type of car.
Absolutely.
Porsche is just one flavor of that. It's one slice of that cake. So that's really the story behind me doing these outlaw gatherings, is just a way to bring a lot of like-minded people together. And you really experience that culture. I did one in Miami that was awesome. I mean, everyone that I've done has been interesting on a certain level, and I've met a lot of great people through them. So that's all it is, really, just a shout out to let's get together for a couple of hours, kick some tires, tell some stories, and maybe go for a drive. And that's kind of my philosophy on everything that I do that's car related, whether it's Porsche centric or not.
How many do you think you've done now of those gatherings?
Oh, I don't know. I've lost count. At least 20. Excellent. I mean, I did one in Tokyo. I combined that with RWB and the Kayasan. The one in Sydney was awesome. I've done a couple in London, LA, New York, Miami. I did one in Switzerland. I did one in Colombia. I did one in Mexico City. And each one's kind of like a slightly different vibe, but the common thread is always the same. So I've probably done, 20 of them. Excellent. All over. But they're always the same. It's 48-hour notice, and people generally tend to like them because I think of the diversity. But it's not this sort of cars and coffee mentality either. It's a bit more urban, a bit more gritty.
I think they really work because of the sort of pop-up event about it. It's just, as you say, 48 hours before, and it just happens, and the right people turn up.
It's a bit more organic when it's like that, isn't it? I think it's not as forced.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I was traveling all the time. I was hardly ever in LA, visiting some interesting places. I did one in Berlin at the Olympic Coliseum. One of the best ones I did was in Hamburg. There were over 500 people there. Wow. But they're always really spontaneous. So I think that just sort of creates that spontaneous vibe of you don't overthink it. It's not like, I've got to get my car ready for this event coming up in 3 months' time, which is fine. But mine were always just a little bit of a way I'm traveling. I want to meet people, and it's a great way to get everyone together in one location, and then things just sort of blossom from there. So that's the story behind the Outlaw.
Out of all those events and all those people and all those cars, was there any real standout cars that are really memorable that you just blew you away or really surprised you?
F40 Miami, surely.
What's that?
F40 Miami, surely.
Well, you took the words out of my mouth. The F40 Miami story came out of a Miami Outlaw gathering. I never thought I'd drive an F40. I put that in my top 5 intoxicating drives. We got pulled over by a cop at the end of it. We had no paperwork, no insurance, out-of-state license. It was looking a little iffy. We were doing some speeds maybe that were above the posted limit, but it just created this memorable moment. So a lot of these things have created memorable moments and drives and people and connections and relationships and friendships So that's kind of the best thing about them. But the F40 for sure was a big standout one. So that's been a memorable one, and that was back in 2016, 2017.
Did you frame the ticket? Is it on the wall somewhere?
Never got a ticket in the end. You know, the typical. We've been doing these blasts. My buddy Larry Chan was there shooting something for Speed Hunters, and it was like the final. Let's go for one final drive. We were done, and it's the classic final drive that gets you. Yeah, we'd obviously drawn some attention. We came over the bridge. The cop was there. You know, and we literally, it was on dealer plates. We didn't have any paperwork in the car. And it was looking a little iffy, but in the end, we never got a ticket. So that one worked out pretty good.
It's well, the last couple of years, as you said, you've lived out of a suitcase, really, haven't you? Travelled the world. By contrast, is it nice to have a bit of time at home in DTLA at the moment? Or would you rather be out and about?
Yeah, it's been awesome. You know, I've been here sort of since early March. Hannah and I had an apartment in New York that we recently gave up. So Hannah's relocated to LA, which is great. She can work remotely from anywhere. So now we're living together after 3 years of a bi-coastal relationship. So that's a big plus that came out of COVID that we spoke about but hadn't planned. Happened organically. Everything for me happens organically. There's no plan. Everything that you guys have seen has sort of happened organically. But to specifically answer your question, I've kind of been on a creative role since March, whether it's making face masks or doing outlaw cooking shows or playing around with cars. And, I've got back on this creative role that when I was traveling, as great as that was, living out of the 22-inch carry-on suitcase, hopping all over the world, it was great. But I'd sort of got to a point where the 530-second conversations, as I described that travel running into people, was sort of becoming a little repetitive. And so for me, being grounded in LA has enabled me to focus on things that I wanted to do but hadn't done because I was never in one place long enough. Couple of examples, my book that came out in 2017 and then 2018 in German. I never had a U.S. publishing book deal. So in the end, I negotiated the rights to my own book. Martin and I, the ghostwriter, are writing 2 new chapters, including some new footage, and we're going to release the book ourselves domestically in the States. It's now out of print, so you can't get it. So that was something I'd wanted to do for the past 18 months, but never focused on. And certain other things like rebooting the Urban Outlaw shop, I'm focusing on getting that back up together. I'm focusing on trying to put together, I've been doing all this great stuff, Amelia, driving all over the world, the things you've seen, but I never documented any of it other than, getting out the iPhone and putting some footage on the gram. So now I'm trying to put together my own sort of small independent, call it outlaw production team where I can shoot more content, because I got plenty of stuff I can drive, whether it's my own cars. I've been able to get into some press cars recently that are not Porsches, which have been fun. But I'm not really I'm not really documenting them because, I haven't found time to put together this team. So that's something that I'm working on. A few things that I'd spoke about before. You guys are on episode 23 or 26, whatever it is, of the Road to Redline podcast, which came out of lockdown, I think. People had been saying to me, hey, you should do a podcast. And I've done a ton of them, whether it's Rogan or Smoking Tire or Leno or whatever it is, I've done a ton of them. But, people say, oh, you should do your own one. Well, I'm still not there yet, but I started doing these IG lives, something that I'd never thought about pre-lockdown. Never occurred to me to do an IG live. And, of course, you can do them remotely, right? So that was kind of like the test for the potential podcasts I'm trying to put together. But the interesting thing about the IG live is they're not car-centric. I've done them with Michelin 5-star chef Andrew Carmelini. I've done them with artists. I just did one with Gordon Murray. I did one with Ian Callum. So for me, these are great things that actually came out of adapting to this new environment, for me sort of staying at home, so to speak, and just back on this creative wave that I don't think would have happened for me during this period if it wasn't for this pandemic that we're in. And I think there's a lot of people getting creative, adapting to this new environment, coming out with things that they probably always wanted to do but never had time to get around doing. So that's sort of what I've been up to the past 5 months, really.
How do you find that those IG lives have gone then? Because there is a few people starting to do those now on a regular basis, popping up on all of our Instagram feeds,
It's interesting. It started out with my buddy, Phil, Mr. Enthusiast, Phil Toledero, the guy who I borrowed his Lancia Bastarda to make the big Apple Outlaw video. I used to hang out with him in New York when I was there quite a bit. And he's an interesting guy. Got great taste in cars, watches, art. He's quirky. And he's the guy that said we should do a podcast together. And I was always like, how are we going to do it? We're never in the same place together. And finally, like middle of March, we go, hey, let's just do one of these Instagram lives. And we called it Geezer Talk. And people seem to like it. And we rambled on about whatever, Group B rally cars and trying to get pizza in New York. So for me, it was engaging. It was enjoyable. It was a way to occupy my time. And probably the turning point in the car world was I did one with Ian Callum early on, probably in April. And I've known Ian a little bit, met him at Pebble Beach a few years ago and did some drives with him when he was at Jaguar. And the interesting thing about the Ian Callum one was once I did that, within 48 hours, I had people at Porsche wanting to do them. Porsche Museum and Andy Brillinger wanting to do them. And it was almost like, wow, people are watching these things.
Yeah.
And they just slowly started building. I did one with my buddy Mittia, that's the chief designer at Lamborghini. I did one with Steve Saleen. And then, ironically, I did one with Scott Dixon, the Indy racer, and he's managed by Stefan Johansson, who this is actually his hat. And after I'd done that one, Stefan Johansson, ex-Formula One driver, reached out. And then, ironically, people just started reaching out, like the Gordon Murray reached out to me, or his PR team did, like the day after he launched the T50, which to me was like, just came super organically, but in reality, it was kind of a big deal. Like cool. The day after he launches the latest, greatest supercar, right? I'm doing an IG Live with him. So back to the organic element. It's not like I'm pitching people, hey, you want to do a live together. It's kind of the opposite way. It's coming to me. And I think what it is for me is it's allowing me to sort of naturally develop my craft of interviewing people. I don't have any background in journalism or anything like that. Everything I do is sort of ad-libbed as I go along, unscripted. And that seems to work for me in that pattern. So, I think something will come out of that, whether that's the catalyst to the podcast or whether I somehow figure out how to pull them off IG Live and stick them on my YouTube site as a IG Live /podcast type of thing. But ultimately, I enjoy them. There's no schedule to them. They're completely random. Last week I did 3. This week I'm not doing any. The largest viewed one that I've done so far was last week was the Israeli guy, Tomer, who did the 15-minute illustration. I don't know if you saw that, but I essentially drove into his studio and he painted a 8x10 portrait of me live in the studio in a little over 15 minutes. Great. And that one's got over 60,000 views. So I think part of the goal there is you have to be engaging. Sometimes people get bored of two geezers just yakking on. I've noticed sometimes when you show more cars, you get more views. But to me, there's no method to it. It's not like, let's go find a guy with a bunch of cool cars to get more views. I just talk to people that I'm interested in, whether it's Ferrari, Lamborghini, Jag, Porsche, or whatever. So that's kind of the story with the IG Lives. They're enjoyable, great way for me to meet people, build my rapport, and stay creative.
Stay social in these weird times.
Yeah. I mean, strange times, out here in California. Every area is different. I talk to my mom once a week on FaceTime, ask her how it is there in England. She's, seems somewhat unaffected in one hand because, she's got an older boyfriend who's 82 who lives out near Bakewell and it's kind of rural.
Yeah.
But California, sometimes it just seems normal. Like there's a lot of people out there driving around. I mean, it's the new normal, right? You can socially distance in a car behind you with no one around.
Absolutely.
What gets me are the geezers that are in a Prius on their own with the face mask. And I go, I don't quite get that, right? No one's around you.
There's a few of those over here as well.
Yeah, all got those, I think.
Yeah.
Actually, you touched on a Prius. Everybody
got to stay safe. I'm always carrying the face mask around. I'm having fun making them. Here's a cool little one right there. Nice. So I've always got them in my pocket, my US American one. But yeah, you adapt to the new environment. Life goes on. We'll all get through this on the end, hopefully, with some new exciting developments, creatively at least.
I was going to ask Magnus, everyone we've spoken to out there in LA seems to have a little electric car squirreled away. Are you in that camp? Have you got something electric as a town runabout, or are you not there yet?
No, I'm not there yet. I mean, I've driven them. I've driven the Taycan. It's what I call high voltage rock and roll. Time will tell. Let's not forget I'm the geezer that just bought a 45-year-old, 147 horsepower, 304 V8, unloved American. I'm not even going to call it a muscle car because, with 147 horsepower, there's no muscle there. But to answer your question, no, I don't have an electric car. I'm all mostly vintage. Depending where I'm going, I go in phases. My daily driver recently has been my 78 928, just because it's practical, it's quirky, it's fun to drive. I do have that awesome 992 Aventurine Green 7-speed manual Porsche that I've had for a week. So Hannah gets a lot of press cars that I'm able to drive, usually high-end luxury stuff that I'm not necessarily too interested in, but I like driving them. So there's always a lot of diversity, whether it's new press cars or old stuff, but there's nothing electric here yet. But I think you got to adapt to the future. I think there's a time and place for everything. I think something like a Taycan is great because they're fast in the hills, even though you got to watch the range. But I think where they really come into handy is commuting, right? If I worked in Santa Monica, it's an 18-mile drive, could take an hour. Makes perfect sense to commute in those cars.
Absolutely.
As for a spirited drive up your favorite road, or putting 500 miles in a car in a day, that's where the challenges or restrictions come with range on electric vehicles. And let's not forget, the faster you drive those cars and you don't touch the brake, they don't regenerate power. So I used almost 40% of the Taycan's power driving from this warehouse to Newcomb's Ranch, which is 42 miles away.
That's a good effort.
You're not touching the brake when you're going uphill. It sucks that battery range down pretty quick.
We were out on the Purbex the other night in a Taycan, and range anxiety was big, wasn't it?
Yeah, we got down to like 6 miles on the way back.
And we were going to get the ferry across, which is cuts out a 20-mile drive. And we were like, shit, is the ferry actually going to be on? Because it's been a bit dodgy lately.
Well, the other thing as well, if you run out of gas, you can get your mates to come along with a jerry can, chuck some fuel in the car. But what happens when you run out of charge? Like, you just,
a really long extension lead.
Well, one of the great things about the past few months is Hannah and I have done a lot of these, call it 300 to 500 mile drives in an afternoon. Yeah. Where you just go, and maybe this is a California thing, but you can certainly let's take the scenic road to Palm Springs and make it a 300-mile drive. And we've done it in like 4 or 5 hours, including all the photo stops and stuff like that. You can't do that in an electric car because you can't do 300 miles. And where are you going to stop, in the middle of, you may not find a charging station up a mountain type of thing. Yeah. So I think at this point, those cars are great for urban city commuting with a short-range little blast. I mean, there's no denying the fast. They don't even bother me. I mean, what actually bothers me about the Taycan is not the lack of true noise. It's the artificial piped-in noise I find more irritating than the noise of the tire squealing, the rock chips, and the suspension. Why make it artificial? And then if I'm going to rant, why call a Taycan a turbo? And there's no turbo badge on it, right?
This was literally our conversation last week.
Introduction of an internal combustion engine. How does that fit a Taycan? But yet that awesome 992 Carrera S that I have, which is the turbo, non-turbo, right? Yeah. You don't put a turbo badge on the turbo 911 unless it's top of the range turbo S. But yet no one seems to mind them putting it on a Taycan because when you ask them, they go, well, it just represents luxury in the top of the line, and that's why we're calling it a turbo. But it's a little bit like, Essex boys in the 80s sticking turbo badges on the hot handles, right? Kind of the same thing, but it's false advertising. So that's my rant with that particular flavor of
I think
turbo.
We're with you on that one, definitely.
Yeah. Well, look, while we've warmed you up.
People are, it's like, how do they get away with that from a marketing point of view?
Yeah. While we've warmed you up, Magnus, I want to chat to you about 993s because I remember chatting to you on your book tour a couple of years back when you come over here for it. I think somebody asked you a question in a Q&A and said you've not got a 993 in your collection yet. What's your opinion of 993s? Andy owns one, by the way. and I remember you saying at the time, it just doesn't dig it for me. Obviously, you've got one now. So what changed, and kind of post-drive, post-ownership, what's your thoughts?
Well, it's interesting that you say that. Ironically, just today, my buddy Johnny Lieberman, who's the writer for Motor Trend, sends me a little blurb. His review on the Gunther Works 993 came out, and he quotes me in Motor Trend articles saying, according to Magnus Walker, it's the Cadillac of 911. And I always said that it's the Cadillac of 911s, in stock form. And not that I'm a stock form guy, because most of what I have is modified in some way, but I just never clicked with the 993. I got close to buying one from a few buddies, and every time I drive them, they always sort of felt a little soft, hence the Cadillac of 911s. It felt a little delayed. Everything seemed a little numb. They seemed a little floaty. They weren't razor sharp. They weren't necessarily fast. They were fast, but I thought I'd buy one and never drive one. And then ironically, my buddy Robert Angelo had that Riviera Blue one that he sends me like, a little DM on the gram, or I see a post on the gram. I'm thinking of selling it. And so, of course, I get excited about it. I got to ask him, how much do you want for it? He says, well, let me drop it off for, you can have it for a few days. And he drives it in, and the front bumper's kind of half hanging off, and the window's not going down, and there's a few issues with it. And I'm like, oh, it's another sort of slippery slope project. But the more I drove it, the more I started to like this car. And it sort of started an RS sort of lightweight type of build. But when it first came, I thought it was paint, but that Riviera Blue was a wrap. So that was another thing. Oh, it's wrapped. And I've always been anti-wrap. Everything that you see around me is paint. So that sort of, ticked it against it. But the more I drove it, the more I kind of liked it. It was engaging. It was faster than the other ones I'd driven. It wasn't shockingly fast, but it was just fast enough to sort of be engaging. Anyway, we struck a deal on the way low end of the market, because that was the other issue, is I'd kind of missed a 993 boat where they were sort of what I would call affordable. Mm-hmm. And everything that I've acquired has been affordable because I've got them before they became, trendy or doubled and tripled in price. But anyway, we agreed on a price on the low end of the market, and then ended up doing that art car, which we might as well go take a look at it.
Yeah.
I've got to figure out how you turn things around on Zoom. Let me see if I can do this. So let me turn the lights on in the garage. We'll take a look at it. Right there. So, my goal here was to do this sort of art car project, which started out really easy. I just literally got out some paper tape, 1/2 inch, 1 inch in like black, yellow, white, and just started taping on. So that came really quick. I like this sort of 80s, almost United Colors of Benetton livery. My goal was not to do something that had been done before. I'm kind of way over these. Let me show you my Martini livery this or my Golf livery that. The goal here was to do something that I hadn't seen being done before on a 911.
Yeah, see, how did you come up with that? I've never seen anything remotely similar to that. I remember it popped up on Instagram feed, and there's no other car like that. Well,
truth be told, I started getting inspired by not that Brumo strobe, but the turbo strobe on an early turbo that would have said turbo on the rear quarter there.
Yeah.
That was the beginning inspiration. Then, of course, I was slightly inspired by my GT3, which was just a modification of a Brumo stripe.
Yeah.
But literally, I started with a box of tape like this. These are, in fact, the tapes that I used on the car right here.
Yeah.
And so that whole, I don't know if you saw the video that I did, but it was another, sort of stay-at-home COVID type of thing where I was just sat out there taping on, taping off. And then I made a little video of it. But to answer your question, I just started running this line from the front here all the way to the back. And then I'd go in with the paper tape and just slowly build it up as I went along.
Yeah.
And I had a lot of fun doing it. The tricky bit actually was when I realized, paper tape's not going to last. I got to find a graphics guy who can do the graphics part of it, right?
Yeah.
So I found a buddy, recommended this guy, Vader Works, and he was great, but he was used to doing a lot of SEMA builds, and those guys would just send him some sort of Adobe file or Illustrator file, and he would stick it in his computer and print it out and then just do the vinyl application. This was tricky because everything that you see on the car, the side strobe was the tricky bit because obviously it doesn't go straight. There's a slight flare to it. He had to recreate that himself. And then obviously we just did the vinyl applique together. So for me, it was a learning experience. It was something that I might not have done before, a wrapped car, but as the car was wrapped to begin with, essentially all I did was a vinyl application. But I've done these sort of, colorful color schemes before. So it wasn't necessarily something it was a different application, but it was a very creative process. So essentially that was the story behind that 993, which was really a follow-up to the 914 art car.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which was a pretty interesting collaboration between the guy I bought it from, Felix. I essentially bought that because of the door. That, the car was all silver with that yellow door. And that inspired me to do this sort of mod livery / Britpop type of thing on the car. And then the great thing about this was him and I did it together over literally 3 days, spent probably $500 on materials. This was all laid out the same way. I'll show you something that's kind of cool. One sec.
So is that in graphics or is that paint on that one?
What's that?
Is that graphics again, or is that paint?
No, this is all paint. So how I started out here was, because I don't know Photoshop, I literally took a photo of the car and then got out my Sharpies and colored it in. Like, those are Post-its on the roof.
Brilliant.
And then we just, Felix and I came down and we taped it all together. So we'd run tape, mask it off, and then get out the rattle can and spray it. So everything on this car is actually rattle can. But the goal was to make it look like it was an old race car that had been sort of hidden out in the desert under sand, getting sun faded. So we laid down some other colors. So when it brushed up, it looked like it had been yellow, blue, red.
The Magnus touch, something like that for sure.
And then the cool thing was we took it to SEMA, which is, the biggest show in America. And it's notorious for high budget, big, high dollar builds sponsored by all the manufacturers. Well, this one was like a last minute edition. In like literally 3.5 days with $500 worth of materials, and ended up at the Mobile One booth and got quite a lot of attention. So the goal here really is, anyone can do this. Don't be afraid to just get in there and, try it out.
Absolutely.
So that was the goal behind the 914, which came from your question about the 993. So back to the 993, though, I like the platform. It's kind of interesting because, as we all know, the 993 wasn't really around for too long. Kind of a bit like the 968, really. So there you go.
So you're down with the 993 then? It's all right. You're not going to get rid of it?
Yeah, I'm down with the 993. The crazy thing about 993s is, I don't know how they are in the UK. It's probably the same, but here they're really expensive. Especially if you want to get a turbo, right? It's like, how do these things become so expensive?
I went for a 993 over a 964 because I couldn't afford a 964, really. The 993 was better value because of just the craziness that's happened with 964 values. And the 964s always need more work. They're a little bit more worn than the 993s. They've gone through the hard times, as it were. So I think in the UK, the 993s are a better value proposition than a 964.
Interesting.
Which he would say.
It's funny, the 964, I took a long time to get to the 964 as well. I've owned a lot of 911s, and they're all early. I've only actually owned one 964. That happens to be that one right there, which is a 1990, which is, I would say, the most performance-orientated modified car that I've built to this day.
Wow.
But I've only owned one 964. It's
fantastic build, that is.
I love I love that car. It's all the little details on that, which is absolutely awesome. The 356 inspired roof, I like. The I don't know if too many people spot the early interior mirror on that as well.
Yeah, well, it's actually got a short wheelbase glass at the rear as well.
Excellent.
You got a keen eye to spot that. That was a short wheelbase mirror. It's got short wheelbase glass in it because it's manual crank. I took out all the electric windows and stuff. So there's not really too many 964s have manual windows. But great thing about that is that frame and crank and glass came straight out of a 67 912 and dropped right in. So did that early short wheelbase glass. You notice there's no horizontal heater wire there.
Yeah.
That's good.
So
touch.
it just shows that Porsche for the first 25 years didn't change much when it came to accessories like window cranks and rear glass. You can drop a short wheelbase glass with a short wheelbase seal. It's the exact same size dimension.
Yeah, it's cool.
I think that's great. It helps people diversify, I think, in terms of building their own bespoke projects and stuff. There's plenty of kit available out there.
You can chop and change between them, can't you? That's the cool thing.
I mean, my goal always was, stateside people do 964. Oh, I'm going to do a lightweight RS. I'll delete the sunroof, and that's about it. My goal was a little bit different, to do some things that hadn't been done before, such as stuff like that. And a gas filler right out of the fender right there. Yeah. So the goal was to, keep the 964 DNA intact, big bumpers, rocker panel, but change absolutely everything about the car. don't backdate it, don't wide body it, but there's elements of 356, roof Yellowbird, and, Sport Classic, obviously, and 911R, and that's an early turbo tail, and that's channeled, the roof's channeled. So, that was kind of the goal with the 964, and I finished that car back in 2015. It's actually an older build for me.
Yeah.
But life got weird back then, and this car got sidetracked, and weirdly, I've never really done a video on it, and I should probably revisit it because it's got a 3.8 RS spec motor, KW Club Sport coilover suspension, Brembo Club Race brakes, set of Outlaw wheels on it. So it's a build that never really got a ton of exposure because I didn't really put it out there. But
is there
probably one of my most performance-oriented builds?
Magnus, is there appetite for like further 964 builds, like and/or action with you, or do you feel like that kind of ticks the box? Because that's a hardcore kind of expression of 964, isn't it? With everything else.
Yeah, you're right about that. I'm all about variety, so yes, would be the answer. There will be another 964. In a way, I'd like a Bad Boys turbo. Nice. I'm always looking at turbos. I mean, for me, I love doing modifications on these cars, putting a team that mods them, but I also love driving my 928, which in essence is not really modified, but it's got all new suspension components and stuff like that. So, this one is a little hardcore. It's not the car you necessarily want to do 500 miles a day in it because you get out shaken and stirred and buzzed. So, horses for courses in the way I say now is I pick cars for the destination of where I'm going. Like later on, I'm going to Home Depot. I'm all of a sudden starting my outdoor garden project. I've got this cool hidden garden back there. So making the trip to Home Depot, what car I'm going to take? I'm going to take the 928 because, there's plenty of room in there when the hatch.
100%.
So it all depends. I like variety. When it comes to Porsche, I talk about it all the time. For me, it's front engine, mid-engine, rear-engined, air-arm, water-cooled. So that covers a lot of stuff that I've got here, the 924s, the 968s, and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, we touched on the 993 there. We might as well work through our other personal cars. So where does the 996 sit for you now? Because that was sort of unloved and seems to have come back into the fold. So where do you sit with the 996 at the moment? Awesome
question. I might as well start right here. $5,000 Gen 2 996. People offer me cars all the time. This story is great. I get an email from a guy, hey, I know you're not looking for it. This was when I was looking for a Gen 1 aero kit car, because really what I wanted was a Mark 1 GT3, but they never came here, and that's a whole nother story on how to try and get one into the country. Yeah. So I got an ad looking for a Gen 1 996 aero kit car. Guy sends me an email. I know this is not what you're looking for. It's an 04 Gen 2, but I'll practically give it to you. I go, well, how much is practically give it to you? He goes, $5,000. I said, does it run? Of course. First question. He says, yes. I said, I'll buy it. How bad can it be for $5,000? Factory slate gray. It's a little rough and tatty inside. Hannah says to me, how many miles are on it? I go, I don't know. I didn't even ask him. It was $5,000 and it ran. I mean, what can you buy for $5,000? A Boxster? That was, I guess the second one I bought, actually. The first one that I bought was one of my faves, my GT3. So I got this back in 2016, Gen 2, 04 GT3. That was all silver. Of course, I had to add some color and paint the wheels, but this was just such an explosive car, super nimble, everything you guys already know because you've done all your features on them. But reminding me of 277, just on steroids, but super direct, super nimble, super sharp. Probably one of my favorites of the GT3 series really is 996 GT3 RS, one of my all-time faves.
Yeah, without a doubt.
I've been lucky enough to drive all the RSs from the 73 in chronological order. 73 RS, I didn't think was anything special. 74 3-liter RS, probably one of my favorites of all time. That car was just like, wow. Why do people rave about a 73? Go drive a 3-liter 74.
Yes,
that's
exactly
the
that.
car.
Exactly that.
So that was kind of my sort of number one RS, and then obviously I drove 964, 993. They kind of left me a little bit, I'm not going to say numb, but I was also a little bit like, I don't quite see what all the fuss is about. Then I drove the 996 GT3 RS on the street, and I'm like, this is the car. If you go chronological, 964, 993, and then you go 996 GT3, I should go, wow, this is a big step up. So obviously I couldn't get the GT3 RS, but I got this 04 GT3. Then I finally got the Aero kit car, which is a 99. I'll show you that right there. So, all of a sudden I'm joining the 996 party late in essence. First one I got was 4 years ago. Then in the past year, I got 3 of them. So red Aero kit 99 Gen 1, super affordable. I bought it in the teens, as you see it. And then I had to get the King of the Hill, which also came an interesting story, the 996 GT2, 2002.
Awesome.
So we should talk about this a little bit, because I had a couple of buddies that had these cars, literally in black. GT2s here in the States, they fall into this category where 20,000 miles on one is a lot of miles. It's like, oh, that's a high mileage GT2. So all my buddies that had them, they had them with that type of mileage on, which for me was, I never care about mileage, but these guys wanted all the money in the world because, hey, it's a GT2 with 20,000 miles on it. So I'm not really about spending all the money in the world. So I passed on those cars. Then this one, my buddy Paul Kramer, I see him teasing on Instagram. It's not even for sale yet, but he's shaking it down. And I'd sort of been loosely chasing these cars around. So I call him up. Hey, what's going on with that GT2? Is it for sale? He says, yes. Tells me the price. And I'm down there within an hour before he's even posted it. This one had 90,000 miles on it, but only 2 LA owners. So to all the GT2 guys out there, this is 90,000 miles on a GT2. This may as well be 1,000,000 miles. No one's interested. So the price was literally almost 50% off market value for one with the 20,000 miles. But for me, it didn't matter. 2 LA owners. The prior owner I actually knew was a club racer. It had $50,000 worth of receipts on it. Whatever it needed, it got. And most of those miles were freeway miles. So, to me, it was like, oh, that's the one I need. It's got miles, but it's got receipts. It's never been out of California, or never had a out of California owner. I'm the 3rd owner on it. And I bought it for, kind of what you'd pay for a GT3 of the same era.
Yeah.
So
Amazing.
for me, it was like, wow, affordable. Yet again, I'd slid into a King of the Hill GT2 996. This is a pretty desirable car. And I got it sort of on the way bottom end of the market. It was unbelievable. It was never advertised for sale. So
It's nuts.
Really happy.
In like the UK, I feel like price wise, they've still got a really long way to go. As I remember last year, there was like two 996 GT2 Club Sports hanging around. One was at a main dealer, the other one was a specialist. And it just wasn't selling. I think it was maybe like 120, 125. I think that's, if you compare that to, GT3 or GT3 RS, it's in terms of what you're getting there, I think that's got so much further to go still. But people aren't really cottoning onto it. They want the naturally aspirated cars,
Yeah, what's kind of crazy is, just to talk about GT2 or my GT2 in particular, I spent a lot of time in the Shotworks 997 GT2, the one where I did the color on it, and then they boosted it to like 750 horsepower, which is probably almost too much. This is kind of right in the sweet spot. But a couple of weeks ago, I had the 992 Turbo S, 640 horsepower, 4-wheel drive, blah, blah, blah. Made this seem slow, really made it seem slow. I'm still driving that 992 Carrera 2 non-turbo turbo, which to me is pretty similar, weirdly, to the 996 GT2. About the same amount of horsepower, 2-wheel drive, manual. So Turbo S King of the Hill has just got so much grip, you never lose traction. It's really hard to try and get that car to break loose. Cornering speeds are incredible. But drive the Carrera 2 992, it really reminds me of that GT2 because it moves around with it being 2-wheel drive. It steps out on you. The fact that it's manual. So it almost seems to me like, it's a Carrera 2S, the new equivalent to a 996 GT2. That's the comparison you guys should do, those two together.
Yes.
Because they're almost 18 years, they're almost 20 years apart.
Yeah. So you said the GT3 996 is one of your favourite, but 996Y is out of the generation. It's the GT3 RS for you. You were saying is like if you had one as your go to from the generation.
Well, ultimately, yes, that's the car I really want. Probably it's kind of hard for me in a way to say which one I drive most because, I put a lot of miles on the Aero Kit car because it was new car fever. I drove it to Phoenix and back, drove it to Vegas and back. You can really soak miles up in the GT2 because, it's pretty docile below like 3,500, 4,000 RPM. And then it's got a short power band.
Yeah.
This guy, as you know, just revs and screams. What I really want, other than the GT3 RS, is a Gen 1 996 GT3, which they seem pretty affordable in Europe. I've looked at a bunch of them. The challenge for me is you can't get them federalized in the States because they're not on the list. They never came in. It's the type of thing where, you can buy them, but you can't import them into the country without a bonded document saying you got to get them federalized, which means, taking it away for 6 months, having someone make it U.S. legal, which costs almost as much as some of the cars that I've seen in Europe.
Yeah.
So it's almost like from a price point of view, it's too early. They're not 25 years old yet, so you can't bring them in under a historical collector car. So to actually legally get them federalized even into the country, you got to spend a lot of money.
Yeah. How about give you a proposition, Magnus? If you buy one now, well, they're about 20 years old, aren't they? I can look after it for 5 years, and then we can ship it over in 5 years.
I'm going to put you on the list. You're about person number 10 that has offered me that really desirable opportunity to take care of it. Makes sense. So when I come to Europe, I can drive it. You'll take care of it. I mean, I've seen Europe in like the low 50s.
Left-hand drive. There's the 996 generation generally, and this is completely hat off, unbiased. It's
really?
It's
sure?
It's gaining popularity. When I started doing videos on the car, the comments was IMS, fried egg headlights, etc., etc. Now, when I do a video on a 996, you don't have that. People are just saying, "Well, that starts to look really good," and you're like, "Bloody hell! These, these the same people."
They've definitely turned a corner, haven't they?
They have. Yeah. And so, what I would like to know from you, Magnus, is what do you like about the generation, but also what do you dislike about the generation as well, in the interest of fairness?
Well, okay, so we'll start with the oldest one I got, the 99 Gen 1 right here. Let me flip the camera around. People, like you say, it is true. You can't have a conversation with them about, fried headlights. Truthfully, I think what you're looking at here, Gen 1, to me, looks better than Gen 2. And I always say when you drive and you don't even see them anyway. So to me, the headlights were never an issue. The IMS bearing thing seems to only be an issue for like less than 10% of all cars. It's like this one, 99, still on the original setup, no bearings replaced, 85,000 miles on it. I think a lot of people just love to bitch and moan, right? Oh, IMS bearing failure issue. Well, how many actually had that? And if this has got 80,000 miles on it and has no issues, it's probably not going to develop.
Yeah.
So I really like Gen 1 narrow bodies, at least in Aero Kit form. Seems super stealth. I love the lines on it. GT2, obviously, king of the hill. Love the lines on that. Compared to, it's like if you park this next to a 991 or 992, they still seem small. To me, obviously, first generation water cooled. To me, it still seem analog, these early cars. To answer your question on what I don't like about them, truth be told, I'm thinking right now, and there's nothing that's jumping to my mind that I go, oh, that sucks on a 996. People talk. For me, maybe the one weak spot that I found, I had a buddy who had a GT4. Well, Sharky had a GT4. I drove the my GT3 right here next to the 2016 GT4. Seemed like brakes were a little bit lacking, at least compared to a GT4. That was the one thing I found. Maybe not quite as powerful, but to me, it doesn't matter. The fast enough, how much more power do you need? This is usable power.
Yeah.
The 700 horsepower to me is not usable all the time. Whatever these things are pumping out seems usable 9/10 of the time. It's a classic, usable power versus power that you can't keep your foot planted for very long. So maybe for me, the brakes could be better, but apart from that, I got no issues with them. People say the plasticky, the dash is this, that, and the other. It's sharing gear with the Gen 1 Boxster. I don't really care. None of that stuff bothers me. So I'm a fan. I'm sort of late to the party, even though I've had that one for almost 5 years now. But I like them. I think it's an affordable entry level. great performance, great bang for the buck. You know, people ask me all the time, what's a great Porsche or 911 to get for the first time? And it all depends on the price point, but here in the States, still 996 represents a lot of bang for the buck.
Yep.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think early turbos, even though I've got the GT2, sometimes I think, oh, maybe I need an early turbo to round off the 996 collection. Ironically, 997, I don't, at this point, have a ton of interest in those cars.
Really? Why is that then?
Too soft. A bit like a 993.
It's probably 993 syndrome.
Yeah.
Gen 1 997, they seem affordable in the station, get them for under 30. They just don't really, I'm not super excited. I guess if money was no object, a 4.0 or GT3 RS, sure, but yeah, they're kind of big money.
I think when it comes
the
down
goal
to
is
it,
you want to, but I'm not actively chasing any 997.
when it comes down to it, Magnus, you're a bit tight, aren't you? Really?
Well, you know what it is? It's all about variety.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Here's the weird thing. I had like a lot of early turbos, 3-liter cars. I still have them. At 7, I'm down at 5. The last one I sold to the guy in Australia, Paddington Outlaw. And he said, why are you selling it? I go, well, I got a few others. It's not my favorite. I don't really drive it. Plus, with the money you're going to pay me for that car, I'm going to buy 4 or 5 cars I really want.
Yeah.
And ironically, one of them ended up becoming the GT3. The other one was the 924 Carrera GT. So for me, it was like I bought these cars when, let's say, they were $20, and then they became worth $100, and then they became worth $200. And I go, fuck, I can buy a lot of cars for $200 bucks that I really want, right? And one of them was a GT3, one of them was a 924 Carrera GT, and there were 2 others. So for me, it's all about timing and ultimately just buying what I like. I've never bought cars, like back to early turbos. It's not like I went, 3-liter turbos, no one wants them 10 years ago. These are going to go up, 1,000%. Let me hoard them. It didn't happen that way. Yeah. This was the car that I fell in love with Porsche with the poster on the wall. Just happened when I bought them. No one cared about 3-liter turbo because they were all following the trend of got to be early air cooled, which I get it. I've been there. But, I'd moved on to the next stage of my collection. So, in a way, the only car I've sort of not missed, but people go, why don't you have a 356? They go, well, I never lusted after one. I didn't have that poster on the wall as a kid. Yeah. It was a generation before, and you got to spend a lot of dough to get a 356 that runs great. So for me, there's not a lot of bang for the buck type of thing. So it always comes back. For me, it always comes back to I just buy what I like when I like to buy it. Like the AMC Hornet's a perfect example of that. I was actually looking for a rusty patinaed E-Type Jag to do a hot rod project on, and I wasn't really getting very far. They were either like restored, which I didn't want, or they were complete rust buckets where they needed floors and everything. I was just going for surface patina. So in these phases, I'm also looking for a Ferrari 308 GT4. I used to own a 308 GTB. That's another sort of unloved car, a Ferrari 308 GT4 from the 70s. It was a car that nobody really wanted, but now looks kind of cool. Yeah. So for me, my taste, they go in cycles a little bit, cool. So I'm obviously sort of still on the 996 water-cooled cycle. And I like the beginning of everything. It's like I had to have a 64 911, right? I had to have a 75 turbo. I had to have the 78 928, even though guys will go, why don't you get a 95 GTS? It's the best of the bunch. Well, yeah, it may be, but it's not the first one, right? Yeah. So water-cooled 911, they call it the 996. So they don't call it the 997. So for me, I got to start with the first of every generation. So maybe I'll progress to the 997 and we'll have a conversation about how much I'm learning.
Probably, yeah. It's just good to see you so passionate.
Can I just go back to the 914? Because my wife's taken a liking for 914s, which is great because she's buying. What do you think to the 914? Have you enjoyed it?
Yeah, it's funny. Yes and no. Hold on. I somehow switched thing with Zoom. You tapped one wrong button. 914s or 914s, as you guys like to call them. Super nimble. This was the first one I got. Ironically, this one's kind of a cool story because I traded it for a set of Outlaw wheels and a couple of grand. But, it will barely go uphill. It looks cool, but it's underpowered. This one falls into the same category. Looks cool, but is underpowered.
Yeah. Okay.
So for me, I describe my driving as spirited, and there's a lot of spirited 914s out there, and you can make them handle great. Yeah. And I have a 2.4 liter S motor, plug and play, ready to go that would drop into that car.
Nice.
But nothing ever just drops in. I put a 914 in that. I got to cool the 914, right? I got to run oil lines, do a cooler. Then I realized, well, the car doesn't weigh much, but it's going to need probably, a better brake setup to handle that power. So then that means, I'm running it on these 4-lug Outlaw wheels. I can do a 5-lug conversion, put a whole SC front end brake kit on it. But then I got to get new wheels and tires.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden I'm going down the slippery slope to make this car go faster. My favorite 914 story is my Canadian Beardo brother, Tamir Moscovici. To thank him for the Urban Outlaw film that he did, I gave him a 914. I had the red one and a yellow one. I said, you can have whichever one you want. And he took the yellow one, which was a running, driving car. This is the point to the story. A free running, driving car. I got him on a set of Outlaw wheels. And then he decided it wasn't fast enough. Went down the slippery slope. Got to do the big bore kit, the 2140, the 160 horsepower, new transmission. He's 25 grand into that scenario. And he just had nothing but teething problems with that car. Yeah. It was kind of weird. Like, the free car became a 40 grand car, and he still had issues with it. Overheating, clutch went out, went on fire block. So I don't know. I mean, I love them. They do handle great. I don't have one in my collection yet that is a true driver's car. Yeah. I have two that look great and drive and handle okay, but I'm always like, oh, this thing needs more power. Okay. I'll take it up the crest, and I'm like, fifth is too high. Let me drop to fourth. Fourth gear is kind of the same thing, except just making more clanking noises and rattling, and it's not going any faster. So I haven't given up on it. It's a slippery slope that I'm not quite prepared to slide down, because I know I can put the 6 in it, and I know it'll handle great, but it's going to take quite some time, energy, and money to get it to where it's going to handle great. So sometimes it's better just leave them. Hey, it's a grocery getter. It's got the 1.8 liter motor in it, and putter around in it. But then there's always the point that you get your foot in it and you go, oh, wow, I just wish it went faster and possibly stopped a little better, because they do handle great. I've driven them on the track. They're great on the track. I have a buddy that's got a 3-liter, which I think is the perfect setup, actually, a 3-liter or hot rod 2.7. And weirdly, everyone always goes, why don't you flare it out like a 914 6 GT? It's kind of like why don't you do a Martini livery, right? It's kind of too obvious. So, I think this one looks good. It just needs to drive a bit better than it looks, but I'm a fan of them.
On the subject of Outlaw wheels, Magnus, that you mentioned, and obviously a majority of your cars have rightfully got them under the arches. Obviously, they're not in production anymore. So is there anything else that's kind of coming soon in that regard? And also, what was the verdict on the Outlaw wheels behind the production stopping? Great
question. Here's a great example of a set of 15x7s right there. This is on the 4-spoke 4-lug one for the bug guys. The old 964s on the 17-inch. 924 Carrera GTs on the 16-inch. The turbos are on them. I'll show you some wheels, and we'll talk about the Outlaw wheel program, which came together in 2014. The very first set of wheels actually is on the blue turbo right there. Nice. These are 8s and 9s. The 75 turbos on 8s and 10s. 2 77s on some 7s and 8s. And perhaps one of my favorite sets we did, is actually on the old, let me drop this down, the Hot Rod 67S, which is, if I ever finish this car, this is going to be the car. So this is 15x7s, polished lip, bead-blasted center, and then 2-tone paint powder coat to match the slate gray on the front here.
That's awesome.
So that's the Outlaw wheels on my cars. The program came about, 1552 reached out to me back in 2014. They were mostly known for doing all the wheels for Ken Block, which was awesome to be sort of affiliated with someone that worked for Ken Block, or not for Ken Block, but did wheels with Ken Block. But they weren't really in the Porsche world. They were in the sport import tuner, Ken Block world. So the goal was to sort of reinterpret the Fuchs, but not copy it. Everyone's copied the Fuchs. Our goal was to make it a little bit differently. So obviously we changed the profile, hollowed out the spokes, and the Outlaw wheel was born in 2014. We kind of had a great run for 5 years, and then 1552 got bought out by the English company Monotune. And up to that point, Matt Brad and I, who were the founders of 1552, we had a handshake deal, no contract, and we were selling a few wheels. We could have sold a whole lot more, but we could never really ramp production up, because probably the Achilles heel to the program was the wheels. What was great about them was they were all custom order. Any offset, any color combo, powder coat, plated, whatever you wanted, you could do. But that meant you couldn't streamline production, which meant we weren't getting volume pricing, which meant, the wheels were not $299. The wheels were like $999. So it was like $4,000 a set of wheels. Production time took quite a long time because they were individually made to order here in LA. They weren't cast in China and came over on a container full of wheels, which would have really brought the price down, but you wouldn't have had the option to do whatever offset you wanted. So that sort of was great on one hand because you could do whatever you wanted, but it limited production because, you didn't get great service because you were only doing 10 wheels at a time or 6 or 5 or whatever it was. So, wheels always seemed to take longer than people thought and probably cost a bit more than they wanted to spend. But we did sell quite a lot of wheels over 5 years. And then when they got took over by Monotone, I guess they had some rather large goals to set up quota, which somehow that program just sort of went downhill pretty quickly within a year to the point where all 1552 wheel programs were canceled, even Ken Block's.
Oh, wow. Really? Yeah, I didn't know that.
Well, Ken Block just announced last week he was no longer with 1552, and they'd done all these wheels on all these Jimmy Connor cars. Wow. So, my wheel program ended probably 6 months ago. And, of course, now that you can't get them, everyone kind of wants them.
Yeah.
I'm talking to a few wheel guys about, doing a few different varieties of wheels. But nothing's really panned out yet. It's back to organic. The 1552 Outlaw wheel came about organically. I get approached a lot of times to do things with other people that just don't always feel right to me. So to me, it's all about working with your like-minded people, projects that make sense. It's not about, hey, let's get these endorsement deals and make a ton of dough. Yeah. That's just kind of the way I am. So these loose talks with a couple of wheel companies, but nothing has sort of really happened yet. So time will tell.
Watch this space, as they say.
Yeah, there you go. Just nice. Backburner.
I was just going to ask Magnus before, because we're time's running on. I appreciate. Going back to our own personal cars. So I run a little 67 912, and I was wondering whether a 912's made it into the collection or whether you've spent much time fettling one. I thought I saw one in the background there.
Well, they all look the same. Interestingly, I've had a few 912s. That's a 67 911S. There's an Irish green 66. As you know, they all look the same. Yeah. I will show you what I have in the 912 world. There's another short wheelbase 67 right there. When I first started sort of playing around, trying to, sort of go from club racing to building, I restored a couple of 912s. I did a 3-gauge 65. I did a 66. I did an Aga Blue 67. That right there is a very early 3-gauge non-adjustable shocks parts car. There's the non-adjustable shocks for all you geeky guys. It's also on the very early 64 and 65 911s. There's the 3-gauge, if you can see in there.
Yeah, look at that. That's cool. That's really cool.
So that's a 3-gauge 912 that's just holding a bunch of flares and stuff like that. These cars for me have now become sort of, I hate to piss off the 912 purists, but they've become donor parts cars. I like 912s. I really like them. When I first started putting cars together, 912s ironically cost the exact same amount of money to restore as 911s. Yeah, but at the end of the day, the performance just wasn't quite the same. But having said that, I am thinking about, I'd really like a 3-gauge early 912 that's completely bone stocks. So I've owned them. I've got a parts car there. I like them. Loosely, I'd like one that's all kind of beat up, patinaed, and, sort of have that in the fleet as well. So I'm all about variety, as you can kind of see here.
Yeah.
928, 924, 944, 968, 914. So, yeah, it makes sense to have a 912. I've had them. I enjoy them, but I don't currently have one.
That's good.
That's the 912 question right there.
Good to see such variety in there, and just continuing. I think the theme for yourself and being a people's champion, and like you say, diversifying and looking for Ferraris, and the car you picked up this week as well. There's all sorts in there, which is great. I think you talked to everybody, didn't you?
Yeah, I mean, for me, ultimately, it just comes back to do what you love to do. I don't chase trends of, this car's trendy, I got to go get that. I don't think a 75 AMC Hornet's on the top 10 cars to get this week.
Yeah.
Was it you that posted the video today with James Bond doing the corkscrew?
Yeah. So, it's a classic example. I literally, this geezer, English guy, ironically, Fraser, is the guy I bought my white 928 from about 18 months ago. Just like in the video, shoots me a text. Anyone that might be interested in my car, he's leaving, he's moving back to France, got to sell his toys. I looked at it, I go, wow, this thing's fucking great. On one photo, he sends me like 5 more, and I'm literally, within an hour, I'm down there and I bought the car. I mean,
Brilliant.
Excellent.
I wasn't looking for it. It's not necessarily fast, but it's got nostalgia. It's got all the character. It's got all the things like an old beat-up 912 would have, just in a 70s American car. You don't see them on the road, so it's unique. It's a different driving experience. Sometimes it's just nice to cruise. So it comes back again to the early question you asked me about the Outlaw Gallery. They're not Porsche centric. To me, it's about variety and different cars do different things. It's like my girlfriend Hannah's got a 88 560 SL, which is another kind of cool car that I never really thought about, but yet it's great to drive around and cruise. It's 30 years old, but it looks current and it's never out of style. It's design that's done right is never out of style, right? So things come and go. But if something's designed right from the beginning, doesn't matter what it is. I've got a Lotus Esprit in the back room there. A great design is a great design. It's timeless. And if you're into design and style, whether it's fashion, clothes, watches, guitars, whatever it may be, right? Why wouldn't you have some variety? I'm in the position where I'm able to do that. People know me as a Porsche guy, and that's what I am. But I like varieties. Yeah.
So come on, then. What's on the list that you're still hunting after at the moment? What's the short list that you've got an eye open for if it pops up?
Well, other than that 912, and the Mark 1 GT3 and the E-Type Jag 308 GT4, that's kind of it for right now. But no, there's other cars on the list. Like, I'd always wanted to do a XJS Jag touring car, a wide-bodied, like Wilkinshaw Racing from like the 70s, but outlawed version. Yeah. So I actually thought about doing that before the E-Type. The problem with the XJS here in the States is you can't find a manual. They don't exist. And you can swap a manual out with a later running gear. I get all that. But the XJS, most of them out here are convertibles. I want a coupe. I want to take the bumpers off. I want to flare it. Make it look like an outlaw touring car from the 70s. So that's a car on the list. I like Jags. I'd like a hot rod Mark II 3.8 like Ian Callan had. So just stuff like that. Ironically, this one you're going to laugh at. Yesterday I'm just happened to be looking around because we're thinking of trading out the SL for a different one. And I see these guys have a 74 TR7. 74 TR7. Who wants that? But it was like $4,000. I'm looking at his manual.
That's the wedge.
Yeah, exactly. So all of a sudden, I grew up as a kid seeing those cars, and I hadn't thought about them for 30 years. And then there's one down the road for $4,000, and it looks decent, and it runs, and I go, "Fuck, I kind of want that as well." So sometimes you chase something and you never find it. Yeah. Like once I was chasing a 64 911, I found a really rare 76 27 RS Carrera, one of the 113 made, and then I found the 64 later. So sometimes you look for something, you don't find it. Sometimes you're looking for a patinity type Jag and you buy a 75 AMC Hornet just to fill that itch whilst I'm still looking for the E-Type.
Absolutely.
So I guess that makes me
I think we've all got that drug, haven't we? It's an addiction, if anything, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it goes back to, great design and style, right? Maybe, the TR7 or a Stag or whatever. It takes me back to my childhood. I recently saw Aston Martin Lagonda. I go, fuck, that thing still looks cool.
Yeah.
Jensen Interceptor, that's still a cool looking.
Yeah.
Super cool, yeah, definitely.
So there's always stuff like that I'm always things are always catching my eye because I'm walking around a lot. I'm observing. I always say inspiration's everywhere. So for me, it's good for me to get out of the Porsche-centric box that I'm in. But, before that, I had Mustangs and Ferraris, I had Lotuses, I had E-Type Jags. It always comes back to variety. I guess now I'm in my variety of just trying to expand beyond the P-car world.
It's great. It's great to see the collection unfold and diversify a bit more, Magnus. Look, we really appreciate your time today. We understand it's precious for us all. So, look, we've got these 10 questions that we want to put to you. And like I say, these are 10 questions we give to everybody. It's a one word answer, Jobby, and the rule is there's no wrong answer, but if you have to think about it, it's not right. Okay.
Got it.
So I'll ping these over, and then you just fire your answers back at me, and it'll paint a bit more of a picture about your Porsche persuasion. So
Go for it.
Question 1, Magnus Walker, air or water?
You got to pick one. I always say both. You need air and water to survive. That's my answer.
We'll let you have it. Question 2, favorite Porsche model?
911. Early air-cooled 911.
Cool. Favorite Porsche color?
Fuck, that's a great one. Irish green.
Yes. Well played. Number 4, ultimate Porsche icon. This is a person.
Oh, wow. That's a great question. Ultimate Porsche icon. I don't want to say the obvious. I'm going to say Derek Bell.
Excellent.
Good shout.
British guy. Yeah, we like that. Favorite track?
Wow. That's a good one. Probably Laguna Seca.
Cool. Very
I've
cool.
driven it. It's fun.
Tafouche or not Tafouche?
Oh, Foose you, baby.
Yeah. Stock or hot rod? That's the most obvious answer incoming, isn't it?
Hot rod,
Yeah. Narrow body or wide body?
narrow body,
Cars and coffee or track day?
track day.
And then the last question, and I'm going to bring back the question from Series 1. I'm really keen to hear your answer on this. Is the Cayman a proper Porsche?
Yeah, for sure. Cayman's on my list because that's covering the mid-engine water-cooled section. Another story, my buddy Raj, he's the guy that had the GT2 that I didn't buy because it was too much. He had a GT4. He just got a brand new GT4. And recently, as his little stopgap car, he bought a Cayman R.
Ooh,
and that was a car that had been on my list for a long time. So, I want a Gen 1 Cayman or I want a Cayman R. So Cayman, definitely a Porsche. To me, any sports car that has a Porsche badge on it is a Porsche.
Yeah.
A Cayman is definitely a Porsche. I've driven the Sharkworks GT4. I've driven the new one. They're awesome. And I kind of want a Gen 1 or a Cayman R. So
proper job.
What would just so we can get a bit of Cayman fanboy action? What would be on the list for if you got hold of a Gen 1 Cayman tomorrow? What would be the rundown for you? Do you think?
For me, I always get the grippiest, stickiest tires. That's rule number one.
What's the tire of choice for you, out of interest?
On early stuff that's running under 16-inch diameter, without a question of a doubt, Hoosier.
Yeah.
Only because you can get them in all the great tire combos and sidewall profiles. Recently, it's been probably Trofeo R.
Okay.
They kind of work on a lot of the, for example, the 914s on Trofeo Rs, the 964s on Trofeo Rs. So maybe those two. Obviously, the Michelin Sport Pilot Cups. Everyone loves those. I tend to find those actually kind of, at least on American roads, noisy and buzzy. Here we've got the Groove Concrete.
Yeah.
They somehow tend to be noisier than a Trofeo R. I don't know what the road surface is like in England when it comes to that.
Yeah, not great.
Obviously those three, but Hoosiers for sure on anything that's, a 15-inch because you can get the great tire sizes, which I think is the downfall with Pirelli and Michelin. They're selling boatloads, but I don't think they realize how big that market is for smaller dimension tires. And ironically, probably 5 years ago, Paul Hembry came to visit me during a Long Beach Grand Prix Indy race. He's looking at all my cars. He goes, "Why is everything on Hoosiers?" I go, "Let me tell you, because Pirelli doesn't make anything in a 15 or 16 or even a 17.
Yeah, 17. Yeah.
I go, "Why don't you do the Trofeo R in smaller sizes?" And they finally listened. You can now get Trofeo Rs in 15, 16, and 17 because 914's on it, 924 and 964's on it. But they're still not doing the full-size run of width. But it's not just Porsche, guys. It's old Datsuns, old Mustangs, any vintage performance car. It's hard to find grippy rubber, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of my tire choice right now.
No, that's quality. That's
What's the other question from episode 1, season 1?
Yeah, it was. Well, we changed it later on because we thought we can't keep kind of Cayman bashing or kind of keep going on about that. So we said rear seats in a 911, yes or no?
Good place to put your shopping is what I say in luggage.
Better fold it down, without a doubt.
Here's a great story. Back to my girlfriend Hannah, 4th of July weekend. Her parents are out from Colorado. There's 4 of us over 6 feet tall, plus luggage in the 928, and I'm driving them to LAX. Brilliant. Not a 911 backseat story, but
I saw the video.
928 backseat is not that much bigger than a 911 backseat from the 70s.
The 70s people carrier.
Exactly. So, practicality, it's a good place to, sling shit back.
Yeah.
Love it.
Quality. Magnus, as I said a couple of minutes ago, thank you for your time, mate. We do really appreciate it.
Yeah, that's amazing. Cracking.
As I said at the top, an icon to these two, I think a real people's champion for a lot of people. And you've helped me out a lot in my career as well. So I kind of want to personally say thank you for that. I really appreciate it. And hopefully see you over here at some point soon for an outlaw gathering.
Absolutely.
Yeah, this will pass for sure. We're going to be back on the road pretty soon. To wrap it up, I appreciate all your time, all your support. It's actually been a lot of fun for me. So thanks for giving me the opportunity. To you geezers, thanks for all the support. I appreciate that.
Cheers.
And Mr. Sibley over there, as always, it's a pleasure. And don't forget Irish green. I got my somewhere Irish green tattoo right there.
Yes, quality.
Fully floating in Irish green. So, but I tell you that new Aventurine green's a pretty awesome color.
It is. It's nice.
We didn't talk about my other pet peeve. It's these guys with paint to sample this and paint to sample that, and I get it, but yeah, that Aventurine green 992. Everything was off the configurator, just spec really well, wood dash, the woven seat insert. So I get it. People want special stuff, but sometimes it's hard to beat the basics.
Yeah.
Stay cool, guys, and we'll see you when we see you.
Yes, nice one, Magnus. All the best. Thank you, my man.
See you later.
Take care. Bye.
Thanks.
All best.
Bye.